episode 171 of the CRICKETher Weekly. As you might be able to tell, we are recording this at New Road, Worcester, the beautiful cathedral in the background. We're here for the resumption of the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy after a little bit of a break, and we've been watching Sparks v Thunder. We're not going to talk about that, Sid. We're going to talk about some of the very big news events that have happened in the last week. Now obviously we only recorded our last episode a few days ago, and we delayed that because of the release of the report by the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket, which was released on Tuesday. So you've got our kind of Insta reaction, having first read the report, but it's obviously been a few days now. It's had a few days to kind of permeate out through cricket, and we've had a little bit longer to think about it. So having had that bit of extra time for reflection, Sid, have you got any extra thoughts or extra reflections on it now?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, we've seen the ECB actually come out and give their reactions to it, and I'm going to admit I've been slightly surprised by their reactions because generally we saw one of the Richards, I never remember which one is which, or rather we heard him on Radio 5 Live give his reaction later in the day after we'd recorded our podcast. We've also heard Claire Connor at the game yesterday. She was also talking about it, and generally the ECB have been very kind of receptive to it and very positive. And most importantly, they've been suggesting that they plan to, if possible, implement all of the recommendations.
Yeah.
So my expectation definitely would have been that they would have come out and gone, we understand that these things are very important, but we'll have to prioritise some of these things, and we can't make change happen overnight. Whereas what we're really seeing here is those ECB executives coming out and going, these are right, and we're planning to do this. Some of this might be challenging, but we're going to do it. Now, there's a couple of possibilities here. I mean, it's definitely possible that when these people have come out and made these statements that they haven't been properly briefed and they're not really thinking about it. I don't think that's very likely. I think these people they're professional executives. Claire Connor in particular has been doing this a long time. She's not going to be poorly briefed. She's going to know exactly what she's going to say going into that. So if she's saying that, then you can make a reasonable assumption that that's the official line. So what is that official line? Is it that they are planning to deliver on these recommendations, or perhaps the other side of it, have they gone for more of what you might call a Boris Johnson strategy? Have they made a conscious decision that they're going to come out and say yes, we're going to do all of this, while actually knowing that they're not going to? Which is it? Well, I think in the short term, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And we're going to hold their feet to the fire if they don't deliver on that. But it has been interesting.
I think we have to give them the benefit of the doubt at this point in time. But obviously, the scepticism that we're expressing comes from, I think, a kind of broader knowledge and understanding of cricket specifically, but also British political life, where we have these periodical reports issued into various institutions that are found to have very difficult problems. One example would be the Metropolitan Police Force, where there's been a number of reports over the last 30 years that have said it's really terrible, and expressed that in various ways. And as we know, reform has not come about. And in cricket, we actually had a report in 1999 that was all about racism, and nothing was really done or seems to have really changed as a result of that report. It was sort of met with what appeared to be open arms by the ECB, but then was kind of a little bit kicked into the long grass, if I may say so. And so obviously the concern is that might happen again. So we're giving the benefit of the doubt, but I like what you said about holding their feet to the fire. I thought it was really interesting that Heather Knight, actually in her press conference, which was on Friday, which was her first opportunity to kind of actually give a public statement about her reactions to the report, did actually come out and say, I agree with what's been said in the report, or I recognise some of the scenarios that are outlined in the report, and I think that we do need to work a lot harder in cricket to kind of to bring about reform and changes. But she also issued a bit of a challenge to journalists like us, and she said, you've got to be part of the change. And I thought that was really interesting, quite an interesting personal challenge. I guess that, for us, we've very much been trying to advance the cause of women's cricket through CRICKETher, but there certainly are examples of media outlets where their very practices are set up in a way that massively disadvantages women's cricket. And some of these media outlets, a lot of media outlets in this country and elsewhere, do need to take a long, hard look at the resources that they're allocating to women's and men's cricket, and actually kind of go, okay, is that fair? Is that appropriate? And perhaps we can do our bit to bring about change.
Yeah, I mean, partly this comes from the editors and the editorial aspect of it, doesn't it? Because, let's be honest, there is no newspaper in this country that covers women's cricket in the same detail they cover men's cricket. They have all of the big newspapers have cricket correspondents, but cricket correspondent essentially means men's cricket correspondent. And the Guardian do their bit, and you are effectively the Guardian's women's cricket correspondent, but you're a freelancer who's only paid when England actually play. And that's not the same as having a full-time member of staff whose role is devoted almost entirely to cricket.
Yeah, and the Guardian are one of the more progressive outlets, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Guardian's coverage of the recent women's test, they gave it a good amount of prominence. And we've kind of heard that that was reflected partly in the viewing figures that they got, and that the Guardian were really happy with their viewing figures. I know that Sky were really happy with the viewing figures, but again, Sky aren't necessarily putting the same resources into women's cricket as they put into men's cricket. So it's Heather's right. It's everybody's challenge within the game, and we certainly shouldn't let the media get away with kind of ignoring those same issues that the ECB are trying to address.
Now, Sid, I know you've got some strong views on a particular element of the report with regards to the MCC, specifically in relation to women's cricket. One of the recommendations was about Lords, and the Commission has expressed kind of some horror that the England women's team has never played a test match at Lords, and I believe the ECB have now come out and said, okay, England women are going to play a test at Lords within the next couple of years, so that's very exciting. But there's a broader challenge here about the kind of the governance setup of English cricket with regard to the fact that the MCC is sort of its own separate entity.
Yeah, and the kind of the one aspect that people have come out and said, this isn't going to change, we're not going to do anything about that, is the very specific one of the Eton v Harrow match at Lords, which has caused a lot of controversy because it is a match that's been going on for a long time, and for a lot of members of the MCC, it's an important part of the calendar. A lot of members of the MCC went to Eton or Harrow. Many of them will have played in the match as boys themselves, and now in the gentlemen of a certain age, they're determined that their grandsons and great-grandsons will continue this important tradition.
And of course there was an attempt to abolish it, and there was a kind of member revolt, wasn't there? The MCC members are revolting, as my dad would say.
So what's happened here is that the ECB have been able to basically go, well, that's nothing to do with us guys, that's all down to the MCC, there's nothing we can do about it. Now, for me, the very fact that they are to a certain extent right that there's nothing that the ECB can do about it because it is down to the MCC, but it shouldn't be the case that the MCC, a private members club, the vast majority of whose members are these late middle-aged, old-age white men,
I think you mean type Ks.
are allowed to have this kind of impact within cricket, are allowed this position, this hugely privileged position where the MCC remain technically in charge of the laws of the game, and they remain in charge of the home of cricket, the most hallowed space within the game. And I think that the time has come where the ECB need to take action in order for the ECB to take control of Lords and to effectively take control of the MCC.
So how do they do that?
Well, the reaction of anyone will go, well, of course, but the MCC is a private members club. There's nothing they can do about it. I'm sorry, but that is simply untrue. The ECB are in a position to take over the MCC if they really want to. And how do they do it? It's simple, guys. You go to the MCC and you go, there'll be no more tests at Lords. There'll be no more men's ODIs at Lords. There'll be nothing at Lords. We'll take Middlesex away from Lords, or you can hand over the keys, chaps. You've had the keys for several hundred years. I'm afraid that your time is done. Your time is gone. And if the ECB were prepared to force it through, there would be nothing that the MCC could do about it. The MCC could resist, they would be bankrupt within 3 years, and because the ground itself and the famous pavilion are listed buildings, that means that in this country there's nothing, you can't build on that land, you can't sell it for building, you have to maintain that environment, you know, in its kind of situation. Then legally they're in no position to be able to do anything, except the only potential buyers for that are the ECB. So if the MCC were to hold out, the ECB would just go, okay, well, give it 2 or 3 years, you'll be bankrupt, there'll be a fire sale, we'll buy it in a fire sale, or you can hand it over now and make it much easier. You know, is that some tough action from the ECB? Yes, but you know, as Raf wrote in her Guardian piece, you know, these people will feel there'll be outrage at it, but you know, when you're accustomed to privilege, as you wrote, equality feels like, you know, oppression, and you know, it will feel like oppression, but I think that that's what needs to happen. Not literally, but metaphorically, burn down the MCC.
Wow, that's quite a radical proposition, Sid, in a week in which we've heard a lot of very radical propositions. I am slightly sceptical that your very radical proposition will be considered by this ECB 3-month grouping of people who will be considering all of the recommendations, purely on the basis that they've got a hell of a lot else to think about in those 3 months. And of course Claire Connon was on the BBC yesterday, as you say, and just slightly equivocating, basically saying obviously a lot of the recommendations are just about being nice to each other, but some of them do have a greater financial impact, and she kind of said we need to sort of weigh that up and think about that. Anyway, we shall see what happens, but thank you for your radical input, Sid. Perhaps you should have been on the commission. Anyway, should we talk about the Ashes, or do you want to talk about the Ashes, or should we just pretend it's not really happening?
Nothing happened, did it, Ralph? No, I mean, no, look, let's look at the positives first of all from that game at Birmingham. I mean, how amazing was it to look out over Edgbaston and to see the best, very nearly 20,000 people in that ground. You know, we've been in there for the Commonwealth Games.
Oh my goodness, sorry, we've got Naomi Ditani just
hitting up behind us.
Quite hard at us. I'm a little bit scared here. Sorry, Sid, interrupted you. Yes, it was absolutely fantastic. It did remind me a lot of the Commonwealth Games. It's the first time I've been back to Edgbaston since the Commonwealth Games, so very exciting, and as you say, like, an absolutely fantastic atmosphere.
Yeah, and a little bit of a different kind of a crowd, I think. So a lot of the ticket holders in the Commonwealth Games were people who'd, you know, gone into a ballot for tickets, and they just, people from Birmingham that wanted to be a part of the Commonwealth Games. So they were like, well, maybe we'll get some tickets for the athletics if we can. If we're not, maybe we can get some tickets for the, you know, the badminton or what have you. So a lot of those people that ended up with cricket weren't specifically cricket fans, you know, which is a positive thing. You know, that we took the game to a lot of new fans there, but it did feel it was much more of a cricket audience, and much more of a partisan, you know, kind of fan mix there. That, you know, people were, you know, cheering, and they were booing occasionally, you know, when stuff they didn't like happened. There was the
Huge cheer when Alice Captaincy comes out to bat, and then Darcy Brown throws down the stumps and runs her out, and there's a bit of a boo goes up around the ground. So lots of, as you say, partisan fans enjoying the cricket.
Yeah, but the ECB have taken this big decision to go to the big grounds, and we feel it was really justified at Edgbaston last night. And you know, that's the kind of guarantee that there's almost that, you know, Edgbaston's going to be part of that picture going forwards, and that Birmingham's going to be part of that going forwards. And it was just wonderful to see so many people there, you know, and people had a great time. People enjoyed it. People sang along with the cheesy songs, and it was just a wonderful occasion. It was perhaps a slightly less wonderful occasion, however, if you were an England player, because ultimately they were disappointed, weren't they?
They were, and you have to say that it was close, but I guess the real difference was Beth Mooney in the end, who obviously carried her back through the innings, and it was a very Beth Mooney type innings, because you're sort of, oh my goodness, that's exactly what I mean. I don't know if people could hear that, but the ball Naomi Ditani just sent that ball absolutely thumping into the fence behind us. Just made me slightly jump there. Anyway, yes, Beth Mooney played a very Beth Mooney-esque innings, in the sense of, you know, there's lots of eventful stuff happening at the other end. Beth Mooney just going about her business, finished unbeaten on, what was it, 60 odd, just very calm, and was just the difference between the two sides, actually. I think Amy Jones in the presser was asked what's the difference between the two sides, how are Australia managing to get across the line, and she just said it was Beth Mooney. They had somebody who batted all the way through. Now England obviously had Sophia Dunkley, who made the half century, and then that wonderful innings at the back end by Amy Jones.
Yeah, we've been a bit critical of Amy Jones, haven't we? And you know, we've said that, you know, she often, you know, as soon as you can put her in front of, you know, a few fans at Worcester or whatever, and she'll play wonderfully and score big runs. You put her in front of a high pressure situation and she won't. But she came out last night, you know, England weren't in a great situation. You know, they were looking like making a pretty poor score. They needed someone to come in and really pull something off, and she did. She hit at a strike rate of nearly 100. She scored, what, basically 40 something off 20 something balls, and you know, great contribution. And then she also performed really well with the gloves, didn't she? I mean, she basically pulled off a stumping that it was like, you know, one of those that there's no other wicketkeeper in the world that would have pulled off that stumping, perfectly timed. It was so fast that, you know, you literally, if she'd chosen to blink before taking the ball, that wouldn't have been enough time. And she also took another couple of catches. Well, one of them was quite late on, wasn't it? And where she ran to take a high catch. That was kind of an interesting, because you spoke to her in the press conference and she was like a little bit down about that moment, wasn't she?
I felt so sorry for her in the press conference. It's obviously been a difficult few months for her, kind of personally, off the cricket pitch, and she just came out into the presser just looking very flat. And I said, you know, that's probably your best innings for England. And she said, yeah, it possibly is. It's definitely up there, but I just can't take any satisfaction from it at the moment. And also, you know, I did ask her about that high catch that she took in the final over, and she just said, well, by the time Sophie Edgbaston came on to bowl that 20th over, I was just deflated. I felt we'd already lost, and so there were no nerves under that catch, because there was no pressure attached to it, because it didn't matter. I already knew we were going to lose, and that was interesting, because watching it, I genuinely felt like England was still in with a shout, but I suppose they're just so used to Australia being able to make something out of nothing in those very pressure moments, and that's ultimately what happened. I have to say, you know, it's a cliche, isn't it, sort of taking the positives. England are 6-0 down in this Ashes series. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't pick up a point in the rest of the series, but it's got a very different feel to 2019, when they were absolutely hammered in the last home Ashes series by Australia. To me, that felt very much like Australia were miles ahead of England, and it was quite embarrassing, and it really led to you know, huge reforms in our domestic structure, the setting up of this new professional regional system in order to try and go toe-to-toe with Australia. And I feel like in this year, 2023, England are going toe-to-toe with Australia. It's a bit of a cliche, and of course, you know, we've still got to work out how you take that one step further and get over the line. But you know, even though quantitatively the results are probably going to be very similar to 2019, I just feel a lot more positively, and I don't feel that we're going to end this series looking around for a scapegoat in the way we obviously did in 2019, and Mark Robinson as coach got the boot then, which I still think was unfair. Anyway, I don't think that John Lewis has got anything to worry about.
Yeah, I think that you know, partly this, particularly yesterday's match, I don't think Australia played particularly well. You know, Beth Mooney did her thing, but you know, they still lost a few wickets. They weren't great in the field. It very much looked to me like fielders weren't in quite the right places. You know, when Mag Lanning is captaining the team, you know, your typical image of Mag Lanning is her, you know, just a yard that way and a yard over there. You know, Alyssa Healy wasn't kind of making those kind of detailed field changes. She was leaving a lot more to the bowlers, and it just felt like, you know, there's always been this thing with when Meg Lanning is captaining Australia, that, you know, a ball hit by the batter always finds the fielder. Whereas what was happening last night was that England were able to, you know, nurdle and burgle a lot of singles, because the balls weren't finding the fielder. Those fielders weren't in quite the right places. The fielding wasn't being tweaked in quite the way that Meg Lanning was, and that's where, you know, we predicted this. You know, that's where they're going to miss Meg Lanning. But at the end of the day, they still came out on top, and you know, I wouldn't bet on them continuing to do so through the rest of the series, to be honest.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, obviously, oh gosh, this is going to be a very philosophical moment in the podcast. In Mike Brearley's The Art of Captaincy, he talks about the advantages and the disadvantages of having your wicketkeeper as the captain. And one of the disadvantages is the extra energy it takes for them to go and speak to the bowler between balls, because they've got to obviously get right out of position, nab the bowler and then get right back into position, and it's just extra energy. So it feels like at the moment for Australia, Elise Perry is fulfilling that role. She is the one who's kind of fielding at mid-on or mid-off or mid-wicket or wherever, and is able to go and pat the other bowlers on the shoulder between deliveries, have a bit of a word with them. Whereas Healy is kind of remaining in position behind the stumps, except between overs. They're trying to make it work for them. The other thing that Healy has obviously got going on is she's got 2 broken fingers, for heaven's sake. And she actually did say, and in one of the presses at the end of, I think it was day 4 of the test. No, it would have been the end of day 5 when she came out and did the captain's presser. She said, I'm on painkillers and I'm having to try and get the balance right between trying to eliminate some of the pain in my fingers and trying to be able to concentrate. And we know, painkillers dull the brain. They're doing what they're meant to do.
That's literally what they're supposed to do, yes.
And so that could potentially be affecting her captaincy as well. So I think, Australia have got a lot going on, but it's very frustrating because they're still managing to win. By the time we record our next episode, obviously, the next 2 T20s will have been played, and we'll be a bit further on in the series. So I suppose we'll bring you some more reflections next week. But I think we better wrap up now, Sid, before one of us gets hit in the head by one of these cricket balls that's continually coming in our direction. Let's go back and let's go now and watch the end of Sparks v Thunder as Thunder come out and try to chase down this total. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you in a week's time.
Run!